May is Hypertension Education Month, and doctors say many people may not even realize they have it. It can lead to serious health problems like heart disease, stroke, and kidney damage, often without obvious symptoms. And the disease can disproportionately impact certain communities more than most. Here to chat all about this is Dr. Philip Levy from Wayne State University. First, let's talk about hypertension. What do we need to know in this Hypertension Education Month? Obviously, we should be thinking about it year-round.
Correct.
But what do we need to know right now?
Well, most important is that the only way you can know you have hypertension is to get your blood pressure measured.
Yeah.
So if people haven't had their blood pressure measured, they should go get it done. They can get it done at CVS or other pharmacies nowadays. You don't have to make a special doctor's appointment to do it. There's also distributed points to get blood pressure measured. There's mobile units that are now available coming out of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. You can buy a blood pressure cuff in a pharmacy and measure it on your own. But bottom line is you have to know your number in order to be able to do something about it. And then once you see that number, don't get scared with it, right?
Yeah.
So blood pressure is defined, high blood pressure, as a number greater than 130, which is the systolic or first number, over 80, which is diastolic or the second number. Anything above that is considered high blood pressure, and that is generally going to warrant some form of treatment.
Okay, well, let's talk about the long-term implications of hypertension. What are they? We kind of gave a little bit of a rundown, but I mean, as a doctor, I'm sure you've seen a wide gamut of that. So what are some of the impacts?
So high blood pressure itself causes damage to really small blood vessels, and those small blood vessels feed organs like the brain, the heart, the kidneys, your eyes, the back of your eyes, the retina. And when your blood pressure stays high too long, those blood vessels get damaged, and accumulated injury over time causes dysfunction in those organs. So people have heard of kidney disease or chronic kidney disease, and in the case of high blood pressure, those small blood vessels damage the tubes that cause kidneys or enable kidneys to filter blood. And when that happens, you can develop things like kidney failure and need to get dialysis. If it happens in your heart, you can develop things like heart failure or heart attacks. If it happens in your brains, you can have a stroke or things like dementia, small blood vessels causing damage to the areas where we do cognition in our brain.
Wow, so many things that you don't often realize that is what the impact is, right? I think many people are probably surprised at home to hear that. How often should we be getting our blood pressure checked?
Well, it's not a bad thing. If you have high blood pressure, you should be checking your blood pressure almost every day.
Okay.
At least once a week, every month or so, just to make sure if you're on medications that it's getting controlled. But if you have a blood pressure cuff at home, it's not a bad thing to check your blood pressure in the morning and in the evening. And doing it at different times during the day allows for things like your morning coffee. If people smoke, which they shouldn't be, but if they do, the impact of cigarettes on their blood pressure. And then throughout the day, blood pressure goes up and down.
Yeah.
So you want to get an average throughout the day, maybe, of what your blood pressure is doing. So it's not a bad thing to measure it daily.
Yeah. What factors control our blood pressure? You mentioned smoking, you mentioned just factors throughout the day, but is there anything that we have in our control over that blood pressure number?
Yeah, absolutely. So diet and exercise and smoking are really important things. Salt intake. Amount of stress in your life.
Yeah.
Things that we can do if we get, if we're in particularly stressful environments all the time, whether it's through work or just our commute to work throughout the day. All of these things can kind of charge up your sympathetic system, your adrenaline. And if that happens recurrently, your blood pressure is going to stay a little bit higher than it needs to be. And there are things that we can do about that. We can modify our diet, we can exercise, we can cut down on salt, we can stop smoking, but we can also be very mindful about how we handle stressful situations and try not to let it get at you.
Yeah, let's get to an article that was just published in the Detroit Free Press, and they cite you in this, talking about those in the Black community as it relates to stress and how that relates to hypertension in general. What was that article talking about, and what was the work behind what they're citing here? And we actually have the article right there on the screen, kind of talking about the information you gave them. So go ahead and give us the rundown on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So it's the Heart of Detroit study, which is an NIH-funded study. My colleague, Sam Zilioli, Dr. Zilioli, is the principal investigator of that study. And we enrolled almost 500 Black, older Americans, African Americans in Detroit. And the goal of it was to try to understand what are the impacts of daily stressors, not sort of big picture stressors, but the micro stressors throughout the day. And using a technique called ecological momentary assessment. basically sending text messages back and forth with patients throughout the day saying, what's going on in your current situation? How is it affecting you? How are you feeling? Because we often think of big things as being the stressors, but it could be something small throughout the day that accumulates. And it's that accumulated stress versus maybe one or two big stressors that we have to think about.
Yeah, I want to move to some other publications that were just recently published that you are a part of as well, talking about mobile health units in Eastern Michigan, specifically in Metro Detroit. Talk about that work. Why is that significant and important?
Yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting that. So we know that, as you mentioned in the beginning of this segment, that certain communities are disproportionately affected by high blood pressure. Black populations tend to have that impact. And some of it is because of the things we mentioned. There's a genetic component, but that's probably balanced out by the environment. Both of them matter. But the key point is that if you don't have access to health care and you can't readily get things done to maintain your health, it's going to be hard to have better outcomes. And so mobile health was developed during the pandemic. We led some work at Wayne State, which was adopted as part of the state's Racial Disparities Task Force during the pandemic, which was led by our current Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist. And that work really focused on saying, how do we identify the highest risk communities and bring services to them?
Yeah.
So as an emergency physician by training, I don't want to wait for someone to show up in the emergency department with the end manifestations. Let's get ahead of the game and let's bring care to the communities.
Yeah, bringing care to the communities. How do you hope that continues in the future? Obviously, that's a Metro Detroit area. We're over in West Michigan. Any plans to expand those efforts? I know we do have some mobile units here on the west side of the state, but it sounds like this work has potential to go forward.
100%. So there is a mobile unit in Kent County that was developed as part of that initiative during the pandemic, which continues to operate today. But the bigger idea is, can we reimagine healthcare? Can we reimagine where people can get access to prevention services in their neighborhoods, in their place of work, on their way to the grocery store, whatever it might be? You shouldn't have to take a special trip just to get your blood pressure measured, and maybe some lab work too, looking at cholesterol and diabetes risk.
Okay, Dr. Philip Levy, we have to leave it there. We appreciate your time and insight into, feel like we hit just like 4 different topics in one. We appreciate it, and thank you so much for telling us about hypertension and how important that is too.
Thanks for having me on.